With even the United States acknowledging real starvation in Gaza, will anything be done to stop the killing? Becoming ever more unbearable, war-induced famine was finally recognized by Israel's greatest ally, while Israeli NGOs accuse their government of genocide. But with aid still only trickling in, how many more will die before the assault is stopped? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Gaza. Reminiscent of famine in 1980s Ethiopia is how the United Nations World Food Programme describes Gaza today. And in spite of Israel claiming it's enacted measures to allow delivery of life-saving aid, the WFP says they are still being denied permission to get the necessary volumes in to save Gazans from starving. But if Israel's ultimate goal is the mass expulsion of Palestinians from their land, is starvation just another tool in Israel's weapons kit? And can anything be done to stop it?
In Gaza, hunger kills. After months of total blockades, Israel has allowed only a trickle of aid into Gaza through the controversial US-backed program. Aid seekers have repeatedly come under fire, and hundreds have been fatally shot. Desperation has reached a critical point. On Monday alone, 14 people died from malnutrition. The World Food Programme warns that 1/3 of Gaza's population has gone days without eating. The world's leading hunger agency says the worst-case scenario of famine is unfolding in Gaza.
My 5-month-old daughter died of malnutrition due to a lack of baby formula, the closure of the crossing. With my daughter's death, many will follow. Their names are on a list that no one looks at. They're just names and numbers.
After widespread condemnation, Israel announced a daily 10-hour tactical pause in fighting and opened humanitarian corridors. But its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists there is no starvation in Gaza.
Where we're fighting, we'll continue to fight. But there are safe corridors. You can bring the food to anywhere you want. That is not a problem.
But Netanyahu's closest ally, US President Donald Trump, isn't fully backing those claims.
We can save a lot of people. I mean, some of those kids that's real starvation stuff. I see it. And you can't fake that. So we're going to be even more involved.
Some countries have restarted airdropping aid. But humanitarian organizations criticize the method, saying it's expensive, inefficient, and can even kill starving people. After the Israeli measures, more trucks carrying essential goods have entered Gaza from the Rafah crossing. Aid groups stress that it's still not enough to reverse the catastrophe, and they're calling for all crossings on land to open and aid to flow faster.
The ceasefire allowed us to have on the first day, the 19th of January, the World Food Programme and all the humanitarian could facilitate 600 trucks just on a daily basis. No looting, no population or crowd that were actually rushing on the convoy. This is not what is happening today.
On Monday, for the first time, 2 prominent Israeli rights groups said their country is committing genocide in Gaza.
For the past 22 months, we have witnessed unprecedented levels of civilian killings, of deliberate starvation, forced mass displacement, and the total destruction of most infrastructure necessary for human and social existence.
That destruction continues unabated. Palestinians facing death, hunger, and loss want a lasting end to the war.
We're tired of this life, and they're dropping aid. But we do not want aid. We want peace of mind, and we want our children. I do not want to be the mother of a martyr, or the sister of a martyr, or the wife of a martyr. Rather, I want to live like other people in the world.
Images of children reduced to skin and bones have shocked the world and sparked global anger towards Israel's brutal campaign. But will outrage turn to action before it's too late?
So will the brutality and images of starvation compel Israel to stop this assault? Joining me now to debate that and more are from Tel Aviv, political analyst and contributor to Haaretz, Akiva Eldar. From Ramallah, founder and leader of the Palestinian National Initiative, Mustafa Barghouti. And from London, lecturer in humanitarian policy and practice at University College London, James Smith. Thanks all so much for being with me. James, I'll start with you as an observer who's actually worked in Gaza as a doctor first, about what we're seeing in Gaza now. The leading international authority now on food crises, the IPC, has still not formally declared this a famine, but some say that's merely because of a lack of access to the area. Do you consider this famine? And does it matter if it's not formally declared?
No, I mean, I think that the situation on the ground speaks for itself. The conditions are atrocious. We were seeing patients with acute malnutrition as early as January of 2024. Most likely, people were suffering from malnutrition even earlier than that period of time. Throughout 2024, the IPC repeatedly alerted that there was an imminent risk of famine throughout Gaza, particularly in the north of Gaza. And what we've seen since is this sort of performance of humanitarianism, this titration of minimal amounts of humanitarian aid into Gaza to stave off the most abhorrent conditions while inflicting maximal suffering on the Palestinian people. The technical criteria that the IPC uses is rigid for several reasons. And as you've mentioned, one of the main challenges is that data is hard to come by. Parts of Gaza are inaccessible by virtue of the profound insecurity that Israel has created there. But Israel has also compromised data collection systems because it knows that data is political. Data serves a political purpose, and therefore it has systematically undermined mechanisms for data collection, which makes it exceptionally difficult for organizations to then speak descriptively, quantitatively to the reality on the ground. And
James, you feel that is all strategic and not, incompetence in delivering aid after UNRWA was kicked out, the only organization that truly had the experience on the ground to deliver at scale. It's not incompetence, right?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. All of this is strategic. It's by design. There is nothing at play here that hasn't been orchestrated by Israel. Israel has systematically undermined the pre-existing humanitarian system. Prime among those organizations that it has targeted is, of course, UNRWA, but it's also undermined Palestinian NGOs and Palestinian civil society, Palestinian human rights organizations, which have been vilified and undermined at every possible opportunity, at every possible turn, frankly, leaving very little space for the pre-existing humanitarian system and certainly for Palestinian-led organizations to function effectively.
Mustafa, as James was just alluding to, and as many argue, this is part, they say, of Israel's larger plan to carry out the mass expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza, and this starvation campaign is a tool to that end. Do you see that as well?
Absolutely, and we don't need to dig deep or look for evidence. I mean, Netanyahu himself and his ministers have described it. They themselves speak about ethnic cleansing of all the population of Gaza. And I think it's Haaretz that just published information that Netanyahu is discussing with his cabinet to begin after annihilating a whole area, many areas in Gaza, like Beit Hanun and Jabalia and Beit Lahia. He's now starting to think, to plan for annexation of parts of Gaza, which would eventually be the total annexation of the whole of Gaza. And to achieve that, he's committing genocide, destruction, killing people. He wants to. It's more than genocide. It's annihilation of a whole people, and by killing them, by also displacing them, with the ultimate goal of concentrating whoever remains in the largest ever in human history concentration camp in the south of Gaza, between Muraj Corridor and Philadelphia Corridor, and then try to push them out of Gaza. That's the plan. And let me explain. They are killing people not only with bombardment. So far, almost 60,000 people have been killed. If we look for the real number of people killed, it's more than 100,000, because you have to count that many people have been killed by this biological warfare that Israel is using. When they deprive people of clean water, of proper food, when they depress their immunity, when for 150 days they don't allow vaccination for children, they are causing epidemics. And one of my colleagues, our medical colleagues, told me that on average, every person in Gaza gets sick 3 to 4 times a month. One doctor told me that he has to keep taking antibiotic flagyl all the time,
Right.
because he keeps getting enteric infections. Of course, because there is no clean water. So the level of atrocity, the level of savage behavior is unprecedented in history. I know that in certain cases during previous wars in a long time ago, they might put a city under siege, but nobody did this.
Okay.
That purposeful starvation. It's not famine, it's starvation, human-made starvation against people.
Akiva, slowly, those who defended Israel are now even starting to feel appalled by what they're seeing. I mean, I think the fact that even President Trump would call it starvation illustrates some of that. And some Israelis are now comparing what's happening in Gaza to suffering in the Holocaust. Is the tide at all turning in Israeli public opinion? And would the government ever respond to that alone?
Well, my friend Mustafa just quoted Haaretz editorial, Haaretz coverage, which is very courageous about the famine and the starvation. I agree, it's a starvation. Unfortunately, most Israelis don't read Haaretz. They watch the government propaganda channel, Channel 14. They need to make maybe some kind of justification of the horror that they still hear sometimes when they watch maybe foreign news. So the game changer in the minds of the Israelis can only be the end of the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. And I mean, the end of the war is what Hamas can do is turning back the hostages, and then the government will lose whatever propaganda ammunition they have. Because we have to remember that also the 20 Israelis that maybe they're still alive are starving also and are bombed also. And I don't blame it on the Palestinian, but if we are looking for a solution in the public opinion, both in Israel and the international community, the ball, in a way, is also in the hands of Hamas. Every day you can see on the Israeli mainstream media another mother, Jewish mother, who is begging to see her son back, or story about another soldier that was arrested because he refused to serve in Gaza. There are more and more Israeli soldiers are suffering from post-trauma from what they saw in Gaza. And what we need is a game changer, and the game changer can be both Hamas and the international community. I believe, as an Israeli, and I'm willing to pay the price, that this is the time for sanctions on Israel.
Okay. But in the meantime, you feel hostages in exchange for a halt in propaganda would at least bring an end to the most detrimental suffering of Gazans right now?
If the Hamas really care about those children and those women and the suffering of the population, and as I agree with Mustafa, that Netanyahu is preparing the second Nakba. In the first Nakba, in the 40s of the previous century, the Israeli forces made sure that the Palestinians who fled or were expelled will not be able to come back to their villages because there were no villages anymore there. And this is what Netanyahu wants to do now. So what I can do is try and offer some change in this dreadful equation. Netanyahu is not going to make the move. I'm afraid that President Trump is not making the move, and more Palestinians will die.
Okay.
So I repeat, if Hamas is really worried about what's happening in Gaza, they have to do something out of the box.
Quickly, Akiva, does it matter at all that Israeli human rights organizations are now calling what's happening in Gaza a genocide, or are they also seen, as activists on the margins by wider Israeli society and Israeli traitors, in essence?
Yeah, they're on the same page, the same camp with Haaretz and the few people who are demonstrating every Saturday, calling to end the war and to bring back the hostages.
Okay, James, let me come back to you, because as the World Food Program actually compares what's happening in Gaza to 1980s Ethiopia, we know those images. And I mean, we're also marking the 40th anniversary of Live Aid, which young people today still know about. They still understand that that was the biggest benefit concert in world history, because people were seeing images of other people starving, innocent people starving. Do you see parallels here? And I mean, could the global public rally in support of Gaza in a similar way?
I mean, there are absolutely parallels. One of the really important things to emphasize here is that when we look back to Ethiopia in the 1980s, the selective provision of humanitarian aid was used to enact population transfers, which is a crime under international law. This is exactly what we're seeing with the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. All of these distribution sites have been strategically situated in the south of Gaza as a means to force people to make a difficult decision between staying on their land or displacing towards the south, where they will be corralled as Dr. Barghouti has mentioned, into this concentration camp, where Israel intends to keep them until such a time as they can force them out of Gaza altogether. The comparisons are many. And of course, the other important thing really to emphasize is that we've seen this strategy employed by Israel progressively over several decades. There's nothing new about the strategy that it's using now. We're just seeing it used, applied, implemented in a much more aggressive form. With respect to sort of popular mobilization by civil society globally, by citizens of the world, if I can call us that, absolutely that's what's needed. Our elected representatives, particularly in the West, have failed to uphold their legal and political obligations. Our judicial systems either, again, have failed to uphold the values and principles that they're meant to uphold. They've failed to uphold a commitment to justice, or they move too slowly. They will make post hoc designations at a time when, it's too late. The Palestinian people will have been either ethnically cleansed or exterminated by other means. What is needed is this mass mobilization of people the world over to do what our political representatives and our legal systems have thus far failed to do, which is to protect the Palestinian people by any means necessary.
Yeah. Mustafa, I imagine you agree there, but I feel I saw you disagree with Akiva's assessment that perhaps returning the hostages would bring about a halt in Israeli propaganda and potentially a quicker end to the war. What do you think should happen to the hostages? Is it a possibility to return them and at least start negotiations from there?
Well, we've heard this argument that if Hamas hands over the hostages or the captives, if you want to call them, or the prisoners of war, as a matter of fact, because they are all soldiers, that Israel will stop the war. That's not true. I am totally aware of what's happening in negotiations. Hamas was ready to hand over all the Israeli prisoners immediately, not in portions, but all of them, in exchange of stopping the war. And Israel is the one that refuses. Suppose tomorrow Hamas hands over all the Israeli prisoners. Do you think Netanyahu will stop? He already said
No.
his goal is to eliminate Hamas. His goal is to remove Hamas. In my opinion, and the Israeli public opinion will be with him. I do not think you can change the Israeli public opinion from within, unfortunately, because what we've seen in Israel is something that is unprecedented in terms of shift to not only to extremism, but to fascism. Yair Lapid said, I think yesterday or today, on the Israeli army radio, he said that Netanyahu brought fascists to the government and brought fascism actually to the government. Unfortunately, the Israeli public itself is affected by that. In my opinion, the only thing that will stop Israel is through sanctions. And I'm glad that Akiva agrees that there should be sanctions. The only way is to have sanctions. If Hamas will tomorrow release all the hostages without exception. As a matter of fact, in the negotiations, Hamas doesn't understand why Witkoff suddenly changed his position 180 degrees. Everything was already there. And everybody was about to sign the agreement for 60 days of ceasefire and continuing then the discussion to release all the prisoners and then have ceasefire, complete, not ceasefire, but end of the war.
Okay.
And let me give you another factor here. What's happening in the West Bank? Hamas is not governing the West Bank. There are no Israeli prisoners in the West Bank. We have 12,000 Palestinian prisoners in the West Bank. By the way, they are also subjected to torture of starvation by Ben Gvir. We've already lost 70 of these prisoners because of torture in jail. Why the settlers are attacking everywhere in the West Bank? Just yesterday, an Israeli on TV, you could see him, an Israeli terrorist settler shot to death a Palestinian in Masafer Yatta.
Indeed.
And that's happening around the clock. So the problem is that you have true fascism here.
Right.
And what is happening to Palestinians is no less than a Holocaust. And that should stop.
Akiva, well, go ahead. It seemed you disagreed, but I also wanted to ask, I mean, yes, Israel still says Hamas has not been defeated. But again, is Hamas an entity that Israel can actually defeat, or this ideology that it's truly strengthening by committing horrific war crimes in Gaza, reinforcing a cycle of violence and revenge that will ultimately put Israel at greater risk?
Well, Andrea, I believe that what Netanyahu wants is not to defeat Hamas. He wants to defeat the Palestinian aspiration to have a state. Netanyahu is my enemy. And I think that the Israeli government is the worst threat to the future of my children and grandchildren. There are already sanctions. I plan to go next week to Europe. I hesitate if I will be able to show my Israeli passport. I am not proud of this passport. I will have to apologize everywhere. I'm very sad that my parents who came to Palestine, actually I was born in Palestine. I'm older than the state of Israel. Sometimes I'm happy that my parents are not alive, that they don't see what I am seeing and what my children are experiencing. I fully agree with Mustafa that it's not the Hamas fault that we don't see an agreement on the hostages. But what I'm saying is that taking into account that Netanyahu and his government are doing what Yair Golan said a few years ago in the Holocaust Memorial Day, that what they are doing is leading Israel to the process that led the Nazis to exterminate the Jews in gas chambers. And I still hope, and if you look at the polls, you see that most Israelis are hoping that in the next elections, we will get rid of this government. Today, the Knesset appointed a member of the Knesset from the Likud who is suspected of rape to be the chairman, including women members of Knesset, a rapist, or he's suspected of rape to the chairman of one of the most important Knesset committees. So,
Okay. Akiva, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We are completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd sincerely like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember to follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.